thank you to everyone on the call. I'll confess just to start that I'm not on Hawaiʻi Island. I live on Honolulu. Specifically right now I live in Makiki, but I grew up in Oahu. I'll try to confine this to 12 to 15 minutes so that we have more time for sort of questions and discussion rather than just presentation. But I'll try to walk through what Housing Hawaiʻi's Future is working on and our sort of strategy and how we can potentially be working together. So we've been doing these presentations around the state. We've managed to visit in person to all 4 of the principal islands. And we've had probably more than 100 discussions like this one in the last 10 months or so. And we start each one by asking people to think about their hope for Hawaii when they think 5, 10, 15, even 20 years into the future. At Housing Hawaiʻi's Future, our hope is that our local Gen Z and millennials will turn their love of Hawaii into action. So the oldest millennials this year are about 40, the youngest are about 25, and Gen Z, some are in high school, some are in college, some have just entered the workforce. And these 2 generations effectively represent the future of our state. When it comes to the housing issue, I mean, you can sort of look around this call. They're not particularly engaged in the issue. And political engagement in these 2 generations is sort of weaker overall. And our hope is that they will get involved. There were a series of focus groups conducted near the start of this project in January of last year by one of the founders, Evan Gates. And Evan surveyed more than 100 people representing all 4 principal islands, millennials, Gen Z, and asked them about, a variety of questions regarding how they felt about Hawaii. And many of them felt cynical or pessimistic about their chance of calling Hawaii home in the future. And these were not middle-aged people becoming cynical. These were like 16, 17-year-olds, students in college. And housing was the #1 thing that they felt would hold them back from living in our state. As you all know, unaffordable housing is linked to so many of the other issues our community faces. It's the single largest expense for most families, adding to the cost of living. Where there is not affordable housing, we have increases in homelessness. And as local people leave, especially Native Hawaiians, we have a loss of community and culture. And the phenomena that's called the brain drain, but what really represents our most privileged and educated people, the ones who we've given the most opportunities to, leaving to pursue their own opportunities elsewhere, which really impacts our community. One thing to note here is, for the last 5 years, we've talked about population decline in our state, and I think it's like net 10,000 people. That is a really deceptive number because that's the net loss of people. So the actual number of local people leaving each year is much larger than 10,000 people, and they're just being replaced by people coming in from other places. So we have to be really sensitive to the fact that tens of thousands of local people are leaving every year to pursue opportunity elsewhere. As the middle class leaves, we have economic inequality, the haves and the have-nots, and then about half of all baby boomers are retired, and the other half will retire within the next 10 odd years. As people retire and begin to live on fixed incomes, the cost of housing is really important. So it's not just young people that are affected by housing, everyone is affected. And the problem is only going to get more severe. So we identified 3 general factors that were inhibiting the supply of housing. So there are the underlying economics. It was great to hear Byron talking about using local materials. Imported materials add cost, but also we do have scarce developable land. And these are constraints that we need to find creative solutions to. But then we have a regulatory structure, the politics and bureaucracy surrounding development that make it hard to develop. I think Hawaii County actually has this better off than some of the other islands. In Honolulu, for example, we've recently had corruption scandals in our Department of Planning and Permitting. So at best, the regulatory system is adding time, uncertainty, risk, and cost to development. And at worst, as is true in our county, it's just outright corruption. And it's certainly not producing the kind of housing that local families can afford, especially young people. And then you have the not in my backyard opposition groups, people who don't want their views impacted. And so if you put all these factors together, you have a climate that is not favorable to the development of new housing that local people can afford. Our group's vision is that any local who works hard and wants quality housing will find it. And so Housing Hawaiʻi's Future is part of this solution. In a nutshell, it's an effort to organize a multi-generational movement that is led by young locals, millennials, and Gen Z. So all of our staff and our board of directors are from these two generations. And our belief is the housing crisis is driven by a lack of inventory. So that's two things. It's the supply. I don't think we're building enough supply at the price points that local families can afford, but it's also thinking about the allocation of that supply. So in our county, we recently passed an ordinance that will make it very hard to operate short-term rentals. But that's a legitimate question, right? How much of our housing stock should be allocated to uses like short-term rentals? I think there was an estimate that potentially as high as 1 in 7 homes in Hawaii is unoccupied at any given time. Are vacant homes the highest use of our property? How much should these things be taxed? These are sort of open questions that need to be asked in terms of the allocation of existing housing supply. And our group's mandate is to end the housing crisis. So the first way we've been trying to do this is to create a sense of urgency, effectively to organize a few thousand young people who care about this issue and are civically engaged enough to demand action from decision makers, to tell those decision makers that when they make decisions about housing, they're making decisions that affect their sons, their daughters, their nieces, their nephews, their neighbors, the young people that they care and love. The second thing is to bring stakeholders together to build consensus, sort of similar to the work that Vibrant is doing on Hawaii Island. I think that there are a lot of competing jurisdictions in terms of government. There are a lot of actors in the housing space, and there isn't sort of effective coordination, in part because some people just don't get along with each other. But our hope is that if young people are sort of motivating the conversation, you'll have the older generations be more willing to come to the table, and in some cases make sacrifices, because there are established interests that benefit from the status quo and might lose out a little bit if we create changes. And our goal is to change the fundamental policy environment. So just like those policies that you're looking at in Hawaii County, we're trying to think at a state level, but also at the county level as well, about what do we need to do to create an environment where we are producing the kind of housing that local families can afford and making sure that local families can always afford that housing. Rather than trying to push projects through a broken system, we have to look at the total system and why things are not ending up the way we want them to. So the theory that we're working with is one of emergence, which is, it's my personal theory that what we call culture of society emerges out of the interconnections, the network of relationships of people within. So if we think something's broken in terms of housing, it's not one person's fault. It's not like a governor's fault or a mayor's fault. It's a collective failure. The language the business community uses for this is integrating the silos, which I find significantly less sexy. So those silos are obviously the public sector, the state and county governments, but also the commissions and planning agency boards, right? So you have county planning commissions at the state level, Land Use Commission, HHFDC, HCDA. These are all important sites that impact development and that need to be considered. And then you need the private sector involved as well, and the nonprofit sector. So as you can see, this vision is very similar to the one that Vibrant Hawaii is pursuing. But beyond that, and I think something that we're aiming for, is this intergenerational collaboration. So as I mentioned before, young people, specifically 40 and under, historically have not been represented in the conversations around housing, in the conversations around long-term planning, in the conversations that affect the communities that they will inherit. It's very important that we include these young people, both because they have good perspectives to add, but also because they inherit all of the decisions that are made today in terms of housing or community design. And so we want to create opportunities for young people to contribute their new ideas, their innovative ideas, while also learning and benefiting from the wisdom of their elders. And then a last thing we're trying to do is to engage the diaspora. So as I mentioned before, for the last 5 years, we've had consecutive population decline, tens of thousands of people leaving our state to live elsewhere. Every year, we also have thousands of young people, college students at colleges and universities on the continental United States, who hopefully will come home, but maybe will not. These are hundreds of thousands of people who have a stake in what happens in our state, but historically, again, have not been represented in the conversation around housing, in part because it's been difficult to organize them. But now we have the internet, we have social media, and since the pandemic, we've realized that it's possible for people to participate in government bodies, even when they're very far away. So our hope is to represent some of the voices of these people who literally cannot be in the room because they've been forced to leave the state. So there's a Harvard Kennedy School professor named Erica Chenoweth who studies nonviolent social movements. And she found that if a social movement could engage 3.5% of the population, it was almost certain to succeed. And these were not movements that tried to pass housing policy. These were movements that were toppling dictators and overthrowing entire regimes. So that threshold you see, 3.5%, is the threshold for massive social change. The number you see, 24,500, represents 3.5% of the 40 and under population, which is roughly half our state's population. And that is our target engagement goal for 5 years. And when we say engagement, we don't mean that somebody like clicked something on Instagram or retweeted something on Twitter. We mean face-to-face, or because of COVID times and the difficulty of transiting between islands, face-to-screen meetings like this one, sort of building that people power. And that's what we're working toward. We have a few ways that we've been engaging youth leadership. So we have a strong partnership with the Center for Tomorrow's Leaders, which provides youth leadership development in the public high school system on 5 islands. They reach about 500 students every year with their programming, and they have an alumni network that's active of about 300 students. 2 of their members, Katie Chang, their executive director, and April Nakamura, their director of programs, serve on our board of directors. We're also partnering this summer with the Odo Fellows, which is a fellowship program for college and university students from Hawaii. This summer we'll have 20 students all working on housing related projects, looking at problems in their community and trying to solve them. In addition, we're reaching out to the local community colleges, universities, and high schools. So we'll be planning an outreach strategy for all 10 UH campuses this fall semester. We're gearing up for that over the summer through the student government, but also through the registered student organizations. And then we're leveraging young professional networks like the Junior Chambers of Commerce, Rotary Clubs, other places where young people congregate, and engaging Hawaiʻi clubs and the Diaspora. So the first thing we've been doing to engage the Hawaiʻi clubs at colleges and universities, some of these are very large. So at Creighton, there are 180 people in their Hawaiʻi club. There are dozens at many of the West Coast Hawaiʻi clubs, so thousands of students that could potentially be engaged. We hosted a fundraising challenge in November of last year, and 4 schools participated: Creighton, Chapman, Arizona State University, and Brown University. And they managed to raise thousands of dollars for local housing related nonprofits. Our hope there is not that they'll stop at fundraising, right? But to get them to realize that even though they're 2,500 or more miles away, they can be helping some of the people that are on the ground working on the housing issue. And we chose 12 nonprofits representing a broad spectrum of things, from organizations like Hope Services on the Big Island that are providing temporary assistance, all the way up to groups like Habitat for Humanity that are just building new homes, and everything in between, to represent the broad spectrum of groups that are addressing housing. We intend to continue this challenge this summer. This summer, we're going to be challenging some of the local organizations like the Junior Chambers of Commerce, Rotary Clubs, other social clubs, to participate in the club challenge, to sort of raise awareness of the housing issue and to raise awareness of the great nonprofits that are working on it across our state. And then we're collecting stories. So the stories of people who've been impacted by housing for our narrative campaign. Because I think once we put a face on the issue, we make it more likely that action will take place. People have to realize that their children are being impacted before they'll take action. So this year we've been focused on our launch. We incorporated officially in January, and then I came on full-time. I quit my job at Hawaii Pacific University to do this full-time. We've been focused on the policy research, identifying what the various potential policy levers are that could result in change. We've been focusing on the outreach and education, doing presentations like this one. We've been very active on Oahu. Oahu has 33 neighborhood boards that represent the island. We've managed to schedule 20 presentations, and we'll be hopefully scheduling the remaining 13 and presenting to all of them before June, reaching the people there. And then obviously we'll be reaching out to the UH system schools in the fall. And we're looking at leadership development as well. So figuring out opportunities for young people to participate in the civic process. Our initial target, because we are based on Oahu right now, is targeting the Oahu neighborhood board system. So 33 neighborhood boards. Our goal is to get 2 young people who are engaged and care about housing onto each of these neighborhood boards, providing them the resources that they need to do so, but also thinking in the longer term about the appointed boards and commissions. So I was very lucky to be nominated by Governor Higa to serve on the Hawaii Community Development Authority. And so I'm going to be figuring out a process that we can use to assist younger candidates, non-traditional candidates for appointed boards and commissions, to help sort of smooth their way through the process, because it is sort of a confusing process if you're not a political insider, so to speak. We're gearing up for next year, which is this magical portal that will open, and there will be nothing like it in the near future. So there are billions of dollars that will be flowing into our state infrastructure money because of the Build Back Better deal. You also have a new governor. You have redistricting at the state legislature, which means everyone's up for re-election. You have a new finance chair because Sylvia Luke has departed to run for lieutenant governor. And of course, the county councils refresh every 2 odd years. This is going to create a perfect storm where if you wanted to take substantial action around housing, that will be the period. And our hope is that by that point, we will have this constituency of a few thousand millennials and Gen Z who are demanding action. We'll have some potential options for policymakers to take, and that we'll be able to take advantage of this opportunity. The Roman poet Virgil said, "They can conquer who believe they can." In the sort of 10 months that I've been working on the project, and it did start in January of last year, so Zachary Amata and Evan Gates did a lot of the legwork. We've talked to hundreds of people involved in development at all phases, right? People who work in labor, people who work in development, building supply, every aspect of development, the government regulators at the county and state level. A lot of them are like, the problem wasn't created overnight. It's not going to be solved overnight. And we understand that this is a sort of long-term project for all of the people involved. But ultimately, if young people set their minds to it and believe that they can affect this, it's going to be powerful. When we talk to young people, initially, they're sort of skeptical and cynical about the prospects. And as we sort of unveil the vision of Housing Hawaii's future, you start to see this glimmer of excitement and hope. Everyone we've talked to wants to be involved. They want to be part of the solution. And when we succeed, any local who works hard and wants quality housing will find it. So I'm hopeful. I think we have like 10 minutes. I'd love to hear your questions, but also your suggestions and your feedback. Obviously, we can learn a lot from a group like this that is super engaged on the ground solving the issue. Last slide is the sort of inspirational slide. It's not so much you joining us though, because Vibrant Hawaii's been working on this for a while. So it's more, how can we sort of work together in fighting for a better Hawaii? But thank you for the time. Look forward to your comments, your feedback, your suggestions as well.